worth it for us to come out and view this excellent presentation put together by Barnard faculty and students. I'm honored to be with you this morning, and more so I'm grateful that you came out here with us because you're the community, and that's what it's all about. It is about the community. To the panelists, participants, community leaders, and especially to the intrepid Barnard College staff, you have my heartfelt thanks. Direct access to permanently affordable, community-centered, quality affordable housing is a top concern. Too many conversations on how to address and even solve this problem began far too late in chronological history. None of these dates go far back enough. And the reason why today Black people in Harlem do not have access to affordable housing may well be in some part about recent policy decisions. But it is in full sum of substance, a situation hundreds of years in the making. That is why no single problem can fix it, and only a vision that systematically accepts and understands history will have any chance of addressing it. With the Powerhouse panel we have with us today, though I know we have but one, identified the correct starting point and assembled the correct complexion of experts to help us chart a new course. So at this point, I'm going to introduce our keynote, who is not able to be here with us in person, but you are going to see him on the screen. Professor Kevin Magruder from Antioch College. Kevin Magruder is Associate Professor of History at Antioch College. His interest in community formation led to a career in community development, which with positions that included Program Director at Local Initiative Support Corporation, LIST, for those of you familiar, Director of Real Estate Development with the Abyssinian Development Corporation in Harlem, the Executive Director of the Gay Men of African Descent, New York City. He owned and operated 2 Harlem-themed retail businesses, Home to Harlem and Harlem Made Style Shop. Now, as an academic, his research interests include African American institutions, urban history, and LGBTQ history. He has a bachelor's in economics from Harvard University, an MBA in real estate finance from Columbia University, and a PhD in U.S. history from the Graduate Center of City University, New York. He is the author of Race and Real Estate, Conflict and Cooperation in Harlem, 1980 through 1920, and Philip Payton, the father of Black Harlem, in 2021. I want to, and also, after you hear from Professor Magruder, you are going to be left in the powerful hands of our panel moderator today, Teresa E. Hassler. Teresa E. Hassler is the creator of Ratchet Politics. It is a nonpartisan civic engagement platform designed to bridge the intentional information gap on the political process. She's an attorney with over 20 years of significant experience working in government politics and the nonprofit sector. Teresa's government positions in New York City include Director of Research, Policy, and Planning for the Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings, OATH, and Assistant Director of Appointments for the Office of the Mayor. As a native of Missouri, she was the founder and director of Maverick Group, an LLC specializing in political consulting, community relations, and governmental affairs. She also served as head of economic development policy and chief liaison in the Office of Lieutenant Governor, and subsequently political director and deputy campaign manager for the Lieutenant Governor. Her New York experience includes serving as the Director of Communications, Government Relations, and Community Organizing for the New York City Coalition Against Hunger, SVP of Strategic Partnerships and Program Policies for Addicts Rehabilitation Center, ARC, and NMO executive of Cleare, Inc., nonprofit serving seniors needing affordable housing. She currently serves as the Vice President of Government Affairs for New York's largest human services provider. She attended Drake University Law School and is a native of St. Louis, Missouri. And that's who you will be left in the hands of. And before we get to all that, I can't wait, but I have to just recognize some people in the room. My brother, the Assemblyman in the 71st Assembly District, the Assemblyman Reverend Al Taylor. I am also excited to represent my colleagues from, I'm gonna do the passport one first. All the way from Brooklyn, Jabari Brisport, Senator Jabari. And I believe I saw my esteemed colleague and chair of the Housing Committee. Oh, there you go. Okay. Senator Brian Kaplan. And of course, he's in the power section because with him sitting over there is our former borough president and current council member of the 6th, 7th district. We have over here Gail Brewer. There are many important people in this room, many people that make a difference. I can't help but recognize over here Mr. Capodella from the Schomburg Center for Research and Black Culture. An institution that was definitely tapped into for this project, and we thank them for being there, and thank them for their continuing work to preserve our history. We have many representatives here. I see a representative of Governor Hochul. Cicely Harris is here, the Division of Human Rights. Kathleen McCadden from HCR. Let me say that. Clear. I see Sister Aisha say cool. Yeah. It's all relevant. We're going to be making a few more of you later on, but right now, let's stay focused. This is a very important topic. We're going to replay this because Professor Magruder deserves your attention. Years doing research that is so important to this discussion, and we want to hear from him. So I could ask you all to start from the beginning. Thank you so much.
Good morning. I appreciate the invitation from Senator Cleare, who asked me to provide a brief overview of the history of residential racial segregation, particularly in Harlem, along with some observations regarding potential solutions to contemporary housing issues. Residential racial segregation, the overt steering of Black and Latino people to certain sections of cities, is a practice that began as soon as substantial numbers of Black people began moving to cities in the 1800s. In New York City, the presence of Black people increased dramatically after the Civil War, which was earlier than most other northern cities. Therefore, New York was an early adopter of racial segregation practices that were later followed in most cities and towns in the United States. In 1880, the Black population of New York City, then just Manhattan, was approximately 20,000 people, less than 2% of the city's population. By then, many Black New Yorkers lived in the Tenderloin, the area roughly from 23rd Street to the mid-50s, between 6th and 8th Avenues. But Black people also lived in each of Manhattan's 22 wards. By the 1880s, Southern states had established Jim Crow, racial segregation practices in housing and every other aspect of life. Although northern cities did not have these laws, Northerners' practices took a cue from them. But another influential factor was the work of social scientists of the era. In his 2010 book, The Condemnation of Blackness, Race, Crime, and the Making of Modern Urban America, historian Khalil Muhammad noted that in the decades after the Civil War, As social scientists began analyzing the census records for European immigrants, they interpreted the immigrants' low incomes, high sickness and death rates, and an overrepresentation among those charged with crimes as temporary phenomena that would improve as the immigrants gained a more secure footing in America. They viewed similar statistics for Black people in the first decades after enslavement ended as signs of inherent deficiency, as these beliefs of Black criminality and susceptibility to disease seeped into popular culture. Some white residents used this ideology to justify segregation practices in housing and other areas. They looked at the numbers of bars and prostitutes that were often characteristics of Black neighborhoods and assumed that they were linked to the Blackness of the residents, rather than to the white people who often owned these businesses or controlled the criminal activities. As the increasing number of Black people moving to New York after 1900 outstripped the available space in the Midtown Tenderloin district, they began to move to Harlem. Many white residents who had internalized the belief that Black people would lower their property values organized on several Harlem blocks to place restrictive covenants in the deeds of their properties, prohibiting future sale or occupancy by Black people. But eventually, many white owners sold their properties as Black people moved closer to them. By 1920, Harlem's Black neighborhood had grown from the 3 blocks, 133rd, 134th, and 135th Streets between Lenox and Fifth Avenue, where they were in 1900, to over 35 blocks between 125th and 145th Streets. Black real estate agents, such as Philip Hayden and his Afro-American Realty Company, were key players in opening buildings to Black people. That is, converting buildings that from all white tenancy to all Black tenancy. While this practice ensured Black people a place in Harlem, Peyton and other Black and white brokers continued the practice of charging Black people, whose options were limited, higher rents than white tenants had been charged, leading into the main economic appeal of racial residential segregation. Segregation pay. Philip Peyton and the other Black brokers, operating in a competitive industry in which they did not have the same access to investment or loan funds as white real estate dealers, decided that they could not pass up the profits that the higher rents they charged to Black tenants generated for them, just as they had for white property owners. Peyton framed his work as benefiting Black tenants desperate for housing, and this was true. But the higher rents he and others charged would lead Black tenants to devote much of their incomes to rent. Some would double up with other families or take in roomers. By the 1920s, similar processes were underway in Cleveland, Chicago, Detroit, and most other northern cities to which Black people had moved, seeking educational and economic opportunities and fleeing the racial violence of the South during and after World War I. During this same period, the real estate industry was professionalizing. In 1924, their organization, the National Association of Real Estate Boards, developed a new code of ethics that included Article 31, which noted, quote, "A realtor should never be instrumental in introducing into a neighborhood a character of property or occupancy, members of any race or nationality, or any individuals whose presence will clearly be detrimental to the property values in that neighborhood," unquote. This clause codified racism and anti-Semitism since it was applied to Jewish people as well. It justified the steering of people of color to certain neighborhoods. To reinforce this racism, the organization prohibited Black people from being members, and very few other non-white people were members. Only members could call themselves realtors, a term that the organization trademarked. During the Depression of the 1930s, the housing industry collapsed as banks holding the traditional interest-only 10-year loans on houses called for loans. Foreclosures proliferated since the unemployed borrowers were unable to pay. To stabilize the industry, the federal government created a mortgage insurance program to encourage banks to make loans in 25 to 30 years with manageable monthly interest and principal payments. If the borrowers were unable to make the loans or the payments on their new loans, the mortgage insurance from the federal government would cover the payments. Landlords saw charge them. In the 1940s and 50s, Puerto Ricans moved in large numbers to East Harlem, shifting its identity from primarily Italian Harlem to a barrio. Beginning in the 1960s, tens of thousands of Dominicans moved to New York after the 1965 immigration law was enacted, settling in Washington Heights and West Harlem. The Fair Housing Act of 1968 passed 1 week after Martin Luther King's assassination, as the smoke from the uprisings in response to his murder still smoldered, prohibited discrimination in housing. Because it came with limited enforcement powers and funding, it could not eradicate the decades-long practices that I described. The effect of decades of being starved of capital to maintain and to build Harlem properties cannot be denied. By the 1960s in Harlem, property abandoned during the oil crisis was seized by the city of New York, creating the conditions for the renewal of New York neighborhoods. When I moved to Harlem in 1985, my rent of $500 a month was probably about a third of what it would have been in some other parts of Manhattan. Many people who could afford to were moving elsewhere. Since private developers had no interest in Harlem, nonprofit community involvement corporations in Harlem and other parts of New York used effective city programs in the 1980s and 1990s, often incorporating federal low-income housing tax credit and other financing vehicles to restore vacant buildings transferred to them by the city for low and moderate income people. By the time I moved back to Ohio in 2012, rents in Harlem were approaching rents in the rest of Manhattan, and long-term Black residents were being priced out of Harlem. Today, private investors are anxious to develop in neighborhoods they ignored 30 years ago. Many Black and Latino residents who live through this now face the threat of being priced out of the very neighborhoods that they helped to preserve and rebuild. In Upper Manhattan, community wards 9, 10, and 11, from 1990 to 2010, the White population increased from 9.5% to 15%. The Black population decreased from 54% in 1990 to 40% in 2010. The Latino community experienced a slight increase, going from 33% in 1990 to 37% in 2010. At first glance, these statistics of Harlem might suggest that we are moving from a predominantly Black community to a multiracial one. But a closer look reveals that rather than moving toward a multiracial community, the decade-by-decade decline in the Black population suggests that in the not-too-distant future, Central Harlem, Community Ward 10, could be resegregated as a predominantly white community. I suspect that then the Latino populations of Community Ward 9 and 10 would begin to decline as well as demand for properties in those areas increases. White people are welcome to move to Harlem and anywhere else in New York City, just as Black and Latino people should be. But white households' economic power, with their average household wealth 8 times that of Black households, and average household income over 1.5 times that of Black households, gives them a great advantage in how real estate markets like New York's. What can be done to create multiracial neighborhoods in New York City? First, preserve existing housing for low and moderate income people, that is, households with incomes below 80% of median income currently live. This includes public housing, which allow apartment buildings and rent-controlled and rent-stabilized apartments. This might mean creating community land trusts and transferring buildings to the trust to ensure that the affordability of these properties is permanent, extending beyond the requirements of the original funders. Second, require substantial portions of low and moderate income people to be included in new market rate housing developments is essential. Third, require affirmative marketing practices in all housing developments, both market rate and low and moderate income, to ensure that a diverse population of people know about the availability of the housing. Fourth, enforce anti-harassment regulations and provide resources and clear information for people experiencing harassment from landlords seeking to take their affordable houses to market rate. In regards to homeownership, there are some specific measures that need to be taken locally and nationally to ensure equal accessibility regardless of race. Discrimination in homeownership lending must be eliminated through stronger education enforcement measures. Year after year, studies show that controlling for income and credit history, Black and Latino prospective borrowers seeking home loans are denied at higher rates than comparable white prospective borrowers. This lack of access makes Black and Latino borrowers a viable target for predatory lending, lenders offering higher interest loans as the 2008 real estate industry collapse demonstrated. Lenders need to move beyond the head-scratching stage regarding puzzlement and disparities in lending and acknowledge that their loan officers lack of vital products of the negative beliefs regarding Black and Latino people that are part of our history and culture. Exposing the loan officers to a more detailed version of this history of segregation that I've briefly summarized today would be a start, followed by an ongoing testing of the loan officers to flag implicit bias. Perhaps mock applications can be used periodically to test loan officers' responses, similar to the way fair housing testers send Black and white prospective tenants to test the responses of landlords suspected of discriminatory practices. The dilemma that we face in Harlem today was envisioned by NAACP Field Secretary James Weldon Johnson almost 100 years ago. In his 1930 book, Black Manhattan, he asked, will the Negroes of Harlem be able to hold it? Will they not be driven still farther northward? Residents of Manhattan, regardless of race, have been driven out when they lay in the path of business and greatly increased land values. Harlem lies in the direction that must take. So there's little probability that Negroes will always hold it as a residential section. It is probable that land through the heart of Harlem will someday so increase in value that Negroes may not be able to hold it. Although it is quite as probable that there will be some Negroes able to take full advantage of the increased values and will be forced to make a move. I believe that with proper interventions, Black and Latino people can retain presence in Harlem and live side by side with white residents. Thank you.
That's really good stuff. We definitely want to thank Dr. Magruder for that powerful message and all that wonderful information. I think what really resonated was him reading from a book that was written so many decades ago, and it sort of spoke to the experience that we're having now. So I want to stick to that point, but before I do that, I want to recognize someone else who came in. Alika Amber Samuel, former city councilor of Brooklyn, now the regional administrator of HUD. So definitely happy to have you here in part of this discussion and everything that you're doing for New York when it comes to housing. To that point that Dr. Magruder made, just reading from that book and speaking to the experiences so many New Yorkers are having even now, right? Just wanted to get your thoughts on one of the words that really is of great concern to Harlemites and all New Yorkers, gentrification, right? I think in a lot of conversations, we hear about gentrification in Harlem and Brooklyn, now the South Bronx and other areas. But what's the connection between gentrification and redlining? And how do you think that we actually got to this point where we feel like we're being pushed out of our neighborhoods? I'll let anyone start before I start calling people.
And can you introduce yourselves?
Oh, and then right, before you start, speak for the first time, introduce yourself.
Okay, all right, my name is Mary Rocco. I am the Director of Engaged Scholarship here at Barnard College in the Office of Community Engagement and Inclusion. I also teach in the Urban Studies program. And I think the direct connection is that redlining resulted in the devaluation of land, and that devaluation of land over time, as cities became popular and as the market decided that that land was valuable, forces conspired to then revitalize that land, which resulted in increased property values and displacement. So first, the land values were brought down by redlining and the decision that these areas were, in fact, hazardous and high risk. And then with speculation over time, people were able to acquire properties in those areas, and when it became profitable for investment to flow freely back into those neighborhoods, the result was increased property values and displacement of the residents who had long endured the conditions that stemmed from much of that devaluation.
So looking now, I'm going to pass it on to Miriam. Looking now, so we know there is a devaluation of property on purpose, very intentional. And then you come into places like, parts of Harlem, Lenox Avenue, 120th, South Harlem, Central Harlem, and for so many people, it's a different world, right? It's changed so rapidly. This is just an example. Parts of Brooklyn and other areas are the same. So how do we draw that nexus between the devaluation of the same land not that long ago, and now the property values rising up, and what we see as a different population, a population at one point, Dane Knott, right, come north of 110th Street, now buying properties at higher rates. So how are we drawing that connection between the devaluation now and the higher value?
Yeah, I think what strikes me every time I go through the exhibit is that we're talking not just about the devaluation of property, but the devaluation of people. And so those of us who know that we're in targeted groups know what we encounter, even when we attempt to go to another community and diversify the community, what are we going to experience? So the challenge is stopping that in its tracks and recognizing when it's happening before it has happened to you, and having some kind of mobilization to defend and preserve communities, because we deserve to have those the valuable resources that are coming into the community be for the people who have lived there and endured everything else before those things arrived. It's happening actively every day. I live in the Bronx. I watch the rezoning of my neighborhood. I see the way that so-called affordable housing brings in, unfortunately, a more of a transient population. It doesn't actually allow people who have lived there to settle and put their roots down, to own anything, to start anything, because we're all overly leveraged and not able to afford it. So I'm not, I don't have a good answer, but I think it's what we are all witnessing that is reflected in the story that's told by the exhibit.
So I'm going to jump around really quickly to the Honorable Johnny Williams, our esteemed public advocate. So happy to have you here. I just wanted to just start off with, just your thoughts on what Dr. Bruce said, but you have talked about very publicly a really great proposal about a racial impact study, right? We talk about environmental impact studies before we get into development, but I think that a racial impact study really would tie in nicely just a lot of what we've been discussing. So just wanted to give you the floor so you can sort of discuss your thoughts about that.
Well, thank you so much. Peace and blessings, everybody. Love and light. Thank you to the Senator for bringing this all together. As mentioned, my name is Johnny Williams, public advocate of the city of New York. The racial impact study passed this past June, so I'm very excited about that. I'm going to use some tweets as we move forward and speaking and see how it's impacting future rezonings. But first, the couple things I want to say is one, we have to talk about this stuff when people get comfortable. We have to talk about it in terms of race because it was designed in terms of race. So there's no way to fix it if we're not honest about what happened and intentionally do our best to reverse it. People always feel at odds for some reason when we're talking about it. But we have to, because this thing is operating now, I would say, as it was designed to operate.
That's
So we have to
right.
change operations. It's working, it's not broken, it's actually working. It's just we have to put a whole new design in. And it's interesting, I think you mentioned, I think you alluded to how when black folks diversify, it's treated differently. I'm from Brooklyn. I remember when the first few black families were moving into Canarsie, they actually bombed the film wall that was showing black families those houses. So this is the difference between how things are working when it's reversed. And it's a difficult thing to do. And I want to say this, no one in this room, no matter black, white, brown, is responsible for where we are, but everybody's responsible for the next generation. And so we have to be clear about that. Sometimes people feel like they're attacked, and I'm like, you actually have nothing to do with this, but you can't figure out what we're going to do to fix it as we move forward. And so the reason the racial impact study is because of exactly the numbers you were saying. People were rezoning communities, but people with more color will be moved out. And that happened as clearly black and brown, Latino, Latinx communities. In terms of this conversation, I do want to discuss black people. Sometimes we talk about, kind of put it together, but it's okay to say black. And when it's on, black people are being pushed out at tremendous rates. I used to start in Harlem, homeschool yards, and my father was student resident director at Harlem Hospital, so I'm lucky. So to see this thing happen sort of in slow motion is incredible. The first time I heard of gentrification was Furious Styles and Boys in the Hood. I had no idea what it was, but he broke it down, and I didn't really understand until I got older. He was talking about LA, you started seeing things playing out here. And, what is important is to realize the impact of these things that have on public safety. Because housing is a part of public safety. Having a stable community, a stable place is a part of public safety. As a matter of fact, the city did a study and asked 65,000 New Yorkers, how do we address public safety? The first answer was housing, the second one was mental health, it wasn't until the third one when they started talking about police and law enforcement. So we have to be very clear on how these communities that are stabilized then affect the public safety. And then, in continuation of the system, we send police to try to make sure whatever's there is maintained, and we continue to send folks under the law enforcement system. So housing is very critical, and the redlining, from specific redlining, from the New Deal was explicitly designed to keep folks out. So we now have to explicitly put them back in.
Firstly, yes, black is not a bad word, it's a beautiful word. So we are unapologetically, using words as they apply to the situation. And the other thing, just as far as, how in New York City, I think there seems to be nationally, this idea of New York City being this fashion and diverse and this euphoria, everyone gets along, and we're so, ahead of the time, but people would be surprised, as I was from the Midwest, seeing how racially segregated and divided this city is with all of the things that it has to offer. So thank you so much for that and everything that you did.
Yeah, I forgot to say what the building is. Anytime there was rezoning now, you have to do a socioeconomic study based on race, based on income to see how the impact will happen, and also make sure that it's in furtherance of fair housing and equitable programs.
Thank you. I'm going to jump around just a little bit, so I don't try no respect for persons. I definitely want to, just talk about historically. One of the things that has happened is we talked about and heard about the exhibit, and even Dr. Magruder, is the role that banks played in financial institutions, at one point insurance companies, being the largest investors, right, and builders of housing developments, and how we learn this information so that history doesn't repeat itself. One of the things that, being a transplant here, that I've heard so often, especially in Harlem and other places, are conversations where people say, man, I should have got that brownstone, they're giving those things away, or people shaming the people, right, who didn't get that brownstone, or whatever the amount was. What's interesting about the conversation is not realizing history will repeat itself, right? And so was a period of time not that long ago where there were only a few financial institutions in the area that were providing loans and equity loans. And so it wasn't for some people a lack of not wanting to or missing opportunities, something to be ashamed about, but revisiting institutions, again, not providing the resources that people need to actually reinvest in their community. So with that said, I wanted to really talk about just sort of, I guess, historically, David Jones with the Community Service Society has such an interesting, fascinating take, just being a New Yorker. I remember when we were talking last week on the phone, talking about your father's history, your parents' history, your Brooklyn. So I wanted to have your thoughts on how history did repeat itself.
Well, I'm from Brooklyn, but I think my father was the Black Assemblyman in Central Brooklyn, Tom Jones. He created that style of restoration with Tom Kennedy. But what he saw and what we watched was in Crown Heights, in Bed-Stuy, white owners were frightened away with African Americans moving in. They were selling their properties at dime, cents on the dollar. And then real estate interests and banks, particularly banks, made a fortune by providing usurious, terms, basically, to potential black homeowners. Jacking prices up, double, treble what the properties were worth because they knew they couldn't go elsewhere. So that's the landscape that created Crown Heights, Bed-Stuy, in terms of black homeownership, and also, of course, the tenants who lived in all of the buildings when I was growing up on D Street. But I think what also was the perception, my father won election basically by organizing tenants in the housing authority. He was the first one who went door to door in the housing authority because it still remains one of the great resources of unregistered eligibles that there is in the city. And that's what broke the white machine that was controlling Bed-Stuy and Crown Heights. And to a certain extent, I think that's still true. The threat of elections are the only things that tend to turn things around. It's led to the enormous creation of black political power that I think my father was being in awe when he was starting out. I had to go up to Albany with him because white pages in Albany wouldn't deliver documents to him. It was so much a southern town that we couldn't get anything done. But I believe the political power that we have now has to be used to do a couple of things. I think it's been talked about. The banks still remain the root of this problem. I was chairman of the Department of Federal Savings for 10 years. And Carter had been created basically as a result of the failure of the inability of black potential homeowners to get any loans anywhere. But ultimately, the big banks still dominate this whole system. And their willingness or unwillingness to finance housing to black potential homeowners is still the root. And bringing pressure on these guys in a serious way is going to be one of the essential things going forward to change what's going on. There's some other things that are in the legislature now that we think that CSS can have immediate interest. There's a good cause eviction legislation called tenants. Already we're seeing the pushback. This is going to be the end of the world. Landlords, you hear all the, read some of the press. They're fighting this right to counsel. Undefended and deal with landlords with high-powered lawyers or not so high-powered lawyers. You don't deal with judges who, I'm afraid, watch my father on the bench, aren't necessarily tenant-friendly, particularly to tenants of color. I think we have to look at the issue of CHOPA, the tenant opportunity approach. You can't have landlords to the very heart of where we're going to be living and where our future generations will be. But finally, we issued a report. I hope you read it. It's on our website on social housing. We got it from our that, you know, it was sort of nickel and diming, 421A, this one, that one. We have to have a much more comprehensive social housing policy. All these things together take legislative action. And I don't want to underestimate, for many of you who are in the legislature know the pushback from the real estate industry and the press and the rest, you know, saying 421A, as many of you know, has been a benefit that's given billions to the real estate industry. And they claim they've helped build affordable housing. But affordable housing is so high that basically won't even catch teachers. And it's affordable to somebody, but I think it's not us, and it's not a whole swath of New Yorkers. This is just a shell game that the real estate industry is essentially raping the city. And I think we have to but mobilization is going to be critical. I mean, you're dealing with interests that have power. They got money. They contribute heavily to political campaigns. They control large parts of the press. And pushing back against that is going to take a citywide mobilization. And I think to ignore it or to say, well, we got White House tonight. As we know, now at 74, I learned the hard way. Right is not enough. That mobilization, followed by a solid plan, is the only way we're going to come to grips with this problem. But this is a critically important decision and effort that has to be pursued if we're going to have any meaningful change.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You know, one of the things that I know you mentioned and everyone sort of touched on is, I like to say nothing happens in a vacuum, right? You know, I started working in hunger. If someone has an issue with food security, I'm going to ask about their housing situation. If there's a housing issue, ask about their workforce situation, workforce education. So I want to turn it over to Rick Williams, who had the privilege of being in spaces together before, just to talk about how, redlining, its impact then and its impact now sort of creates this comprehensive sort of whirlwind of issues. Housing is one, very important, but housing is only part of the full scale, of the detriment that impacts families and individuals. Like I said, workforce, food security, so on and so forth. So I want to just turn it over to you, introduce yourself, and talk about what you see on the ground.
Hi everyone, my name is Barry Williams. I'm the Executive Director of the Association for Neighborhood and Housing Development, or AHD, and we're about 50 years old, and we represent the neighborhood-based nonprofit affordable housing developers, tenants' rights groups, community organizers. Dave talked about Bed-Stuy Restoration. They're one of our original members. So it's the folks who are doing affordable housing in places like Harlem when nobody else was here doing it, right? And I think that that's an important piece when we're talking about redlining and how we got here. And I'm sorry, I want to make sure I thank the Senator for inviting me up here to speak on this, because too often we skip the part about race as a part of this, and Gianni mentioned it, this is the design, right? I love April and the team's title of Undesign the Redline, because this was the design. This is how this was intended. It is working the way it was designed. It's not that our communities lack value, it's that somebody made the decision to shore up value in white communities at our expense. Right? And it actually isn't that they wanted to devalue black communities. They didn't really care what happened to us. They just wanted to make sure their communities had value. The design was, we need investment, we need money, we need capital, and we need development in the white communities that we are focused on. And so the decision was the outcomes and the ramifications of that for whoever else and wherever else is what it is. right? And so we're still living with that today. And one of the struggles that we all have policy-wise is that we are tasked with undesigning this thing that is so explicitly rooted in racism without touching race. So there is nothing that we are allowed to do right now in our housing policy, minus the racial impact study, which strangely enough in government is changed to the name EDDI. What is it? Equality, Displacement, Development, so I don't know, something, EDDE. But interestingly, right, that language gets dropped, right? But we don't get to say, this is a neighborhood where Black people weren't invested in and Black businesses weren't invested in, and so we're now going to invest in Black people and we're now going to invest in Black businesses. What we do instead is say, we're going to create the CRA, the Community Reinvestment Act. It's going to focus its investments on low and moderate income communities. We don't, who it goes to, what they're doing with it. Is it going for a brand new facility that's gonna displace everybody? That's kind of not the point. The point is to flow money to these places, and so in many ways, the CRA has brought investment into the communities that is now displacing us. So the tool that we created to bring money and investment into our communities of color is now the tool that's like creating this path that's pushing us out, right? So it's very, and I think the hard piece is, we are talking about things like affordable housing, and without recognizing that there are very different intents here of what people are trying to do. There are folks up here who are like, we're trying to create units that our neighborhood, our residents, our neighbors, our families can actually afford. That's very different than the design of, David talked about 421A. I want an affordable housing construct that allows me to have 30 years of no property taxes and 60-70% market rate building. And that is currently the policy, right? For it currently, and the argument of real estate is we need the supply, we need the units, you have to do this, the sky will fall if we don't do it. What on earth would happen to the city's numbers? And demographics and number-wise, yeah, we have a lot of people, we need to house a lot of people, we have a housing crisis. But 50% of New York can qualify for a 70% AMI unit or above. So the units we need are not the units they're going to need. And this policy tool, where we're giving them $1 billion worth of stuff a year, isn't getting us any closer to the fact that we've got somebody new coming in who needs and so we can't allow their narrative to hold us hostage of creating the housing that we need for our Black communities, because fundamentally, if we keep going where we are, as the doctor said, we are going to fundamentally get to a place where we don't know where Black and brown people can go in New York City. We're going to run out of space as we get taken out of our spaces, which is what many of us are seeing happening in our communities and neighborhoods now.
Thank you so much. You're gonna do that. I wanna definitely, really quickly, before I tell you what you think about you, I want to give public advocate an opportunity, just again, I know that you're not gonna stick around much longer, so I'm gonna try to.
I want hopefully people take back from this actual things that we have to do. And so sometimes you hear things in the news, you may not be able to put it in context what's happening. So when you have council members saying they don't want a certain rezoning because it doesn't have what we need, they'll sometimes paint it as being crazy when they're really not. They're really trying to fight for the housing that's needed. Also, communities that claim to support what we're doing will then say, I don't want it in my backyard. So we see a lot of folks who fight these things except when it's their school or when it's their community. So we have to talk about that as well, so that we can welcome the actual affordability that we're speaking about. And I think what we heard is, like, the money is a huge part of it. And so the devaluing and repurchasing was all about funding, was all about money. We need money to build the type of affordability that we need. One of the reasons, when I had a reason to be running all across New York State, we pushed for 1 million units to be built and preserved. Preservation, by the way, no housing plan is real without preservation, so we have to preserve this affordability and actually have not preserved losing it. But we need to build and preserve 1 million units across the state. Most of that would be in New York City. And a large part of that was the social housing of people. No one was paying more than 30% of their income in rent. And the buildings that are not being able to sustain itself can then use government money instead of 421A, can use money to make sure those sustain. We haven't had housing like that since Michelamo.
That's right.
So we have to elect folks who are going to do this. This is a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
But there's real money that are pushing folks to be elected to not do this. So we have to be very clear about what's happening. But I just want to say thank you so much for giving me the opportunity, and I apologize for having you.
Thank you very much.
I just want to thank Jemani. I want to thank Jemani. I just got to take a moment to say this. I'm so glad that somebody else said that. I didn't say black to him. But it's so important. Thank you for that point that you raised. And James Gray, thank you for reminding me that today is Adam Clayton Powell's birthday.
By the way, I saw this work as a community organizer in-house.
Yes.
Tenants and neighbors.
So, really quickly, I want to acknowledge Keisha Sutton, Deputy Manhattan Borough President, who is here. Thank you so much. My Borough President's office. One other thing, a couple of things that Marika said, and I didn't hear much is, how this race impact study has already changed names. And one of the things I was talking to the senator about yesterday was how we're so quick to sort of wash out and wash over race terms, right? Race becomes diversity, diversity becomes this whole thing, black becomes people of color, and it's something that it happens so quickly that if you're not paying attention, it sort of slides under the radar. And so, again, I wanted to thank you for discussing that.
I would like to apologize, I have to go to the NTA. I'm an NTA board. I'm fighting Arabic.
But thank you so much, and that ties in, right? What happens in the back end? Housing, transportation, education. So thank you so much. We appreciate your work and the work of the Community Service Society. So wanted to definitely, I'm trying to give everybody an opportunity, and we're going to open it up a little bit. April, you actually did a lot to just actually bring this into fruition, right? The exhibit and the research and the study. And so even though this is a Harlem crowd and we're in New York City, wanted to just talk to you about probably one of the most upsetting things that you saw as you were, ask you guys to just one of the most disturbing things that you may have seen, just in sort of doing this research and designing these exhibits, not just here, but across the country.
Well, I'm a New Yorker, and I'm in Brighton, the Bronx, and the impetus behind this exhibition was myself growing up in a home that had been burned from the infamous fires of the Bronx, in 3 rooms with a kerosene heater and no running hot water. It was that early age where I would go into school, pledge allegiance to a flag, and realize that the real threat to democracy was the 80 to 85% of that housing stock now in rubble that were my playgrounds in Red Back Park. Seeing nuances that a redlining map does not capture of the epidemics that ravaged my community, from heroin, which my father was an addict, to the heels of that with HIV/AIDS, which he also died. To then being introduced to a new generation of crack. Wow. And on the heels of crack, unprecedented violence in the Tremont community, which remains one of the poorest districts in New York City. So this exhibition isn't just academic research for me, or part of me being an architect and trying to use that profession to unpack how we design our communities and our neighborhoods. This is very personal. It's where I channel a rage that I have seen from generation to generation consume Black and brown, but many others. And as this exhibit travels all across the country, as well as the new exhibition, The Practice of Democracy, the biggest threat to democracy is the injustices and the psychology of inequity that we continue to use to build up into violence. This exhibition is a tool that we springboard from. Because when we sit in rooms and we give the funding, we have a major infrastructure bill coming down this pipeline that's going to exacerbate everything that we're speaking about for the next 4 to 5 generations. If the policies that we are creating and the spaces to do this work are not different. Pause for a second and think of the architect firms that are coming into the very communities designing your housing. Who's sitting at that table? And how many of them look like each of you?
Not many of us.
No. But we're giving them the power to create the industry, to then fight them for what is created.
I'm so sorry.
So we have to look at what we have as our powerful tools now for financing. Mr. Jones was accurate. I spoke recently at the American College of Mortgage Attorneys, which are the power brokers or the financial instruments that design our commercial and residential spaces. And while, of course, these are intentional systems like Rita and others have highlighted, when we look at it, it's a threat to our collective humanity. Because if we can't empathize and see each other, where does democracy stand? And when you're in these rooms with people making decisions, not only for Parliament, because this isn't just a Harlem issue. This is an issue from coast to coast, from north to south. And it's how do we mobilize beyond our geographical footprint to understand the spatial inequity is killing us all, particularly the Black and brown community. When you look at places like Trenton, New Jersey, where I do a lot of work in, those are canvases to really actualize the vision of housing and beyond. I tried to purchase a home recently and was approved for a significant amount of money. The minute I mentioned that I was going to take that pre-approval and reinvest back in my communities that reflect me and my value systems, it literally is cut in half.
Whoa.
So when we say redlining was something that happened under the media policies, we're still dealing with the consequences today. And we do not have the financial instruments that allow us to be able to retain. You spoke about brownstones. Well, how can we buy a brownstone and take the $500,000 to $1 million to invest in repairing it when there is no instrument that allows us to do that? Trenton is on the brink of becoming what the Bronx and the boroughs were, because they have almost 2,000 vacancies. There are people in Trenton that want to stay in these spaces, but unfortunately, there is no instrument that says we can stay, buy, and build. So what I'm proposing is that we decouple construction and renovation loans from traditional appraisal and mortgage instruments. And we create community reparations funds that we leverage and use to really build back our communities. Because the minute you attach it to appraisal systems, you're not going to get the value to do that. And how do we create that reparations fund for communities that have historically been disinvested, that uses it like a pension fund, where it's not about my individual ability to create and buy a property and scale in value. It's about building community wealth. It's about allowing me to do the repairs, but ensuring that communities that reside next door to me can tap into a fund that don't have the credit worthiness, that then appreciates the entire neighborhood. And of course, this is the work that we have to do, because it's not a slight, but I'm tired of programs that push me back into sharecropper housing. I'm sorry. That is the funding that we use, and we give you $5,000 and say keep it moving.
Come on.
So when we talk about collective action and the banks and financial instruments, you're sitting now on the board of the Treasury, it's committee. Because it's part of the Treasury, you're in rooms where 99.9% of the people here have no empathy or connection to the conditions and the nuances of what has happened. And it's our job to make them feel it. Not yelling, not screaming, that's not what I'm talking about. It's saying if you purport the ideologies of we the people and life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, what makes you think I don't want that? This work is a springboard for something much bigger. And I ask each of you, ask your local elected officials, ask your council members, ask who are you giving the contracts to? How are you enriching those power brokers to design our communities? And the type of housing that they design is a cognitive reinforcement of human values within our built environment. They design in a way that gives a spectacle to say, this is what real work. Because luxury is only reserved for here or when we erase you from our I encourage you all to look at the exhibit. I encourage you all, the Andrew Friedman Home in the Bronx will be hosting the next iteration of the exhibition, The Practice of Democracy. We hold these truths that looks at how democracy is spatialized through our designs of buildings, through our planning, and beyond. This is the work, again, that we all have to be mobilized to do. Because the biggest threat to democracy is when we get up every single day and we do not see it show up for us. Thank you very much.
I heard some policy recommendations. One of the things I wanted to touch on, I know it was on my mind, slipped my mind, was we talk about AMI, right? And we talk about that measure. What is that, right? And we just, I guess a few weeks ago in November, we're going to do, a cost of living study, here in New York, so that we can actually have a determination of what it costs to live in New York that is more accurate than the federal guideline that has been around since the 60s, and they still use the same measure. So wanted to talk about, when we talk about affordable housing, one of the biggest issues is we say it's not really affordable. Affordable for who? When we look at those requirements, those income requirements. So wanting to, and this is for each of y'all, actually start with, I'm gonna start with Mary and or Miriam. How do we go back and look at, the federal government and how they basically intentionally, set up a system where even today we are at the behest of skewed numbers, skewed policy. We're on the receiving end of high interest loans. We are unable to qualify for what they consider affordable. So I just wanted to just sort of historically go back into the federal government's role and how we actually got to this point.
So I think one of the things that the exhibit does that really is such a tremendous gift is it gives us the receipts. And those receipts are in the form of what I as a scholar call primary sources, right? The damning area descriptions and the maps are one thing. But we also see sort of the more subtler instruments that were created by the federal government. The NHA Underwriter's Manual from the 1930s, which promotes and gives you a how-to guide on how to create restrictive covenants that then went on to constrain the ability for Black people, Black families to buy housing. One of the statistics that I cited earlier in the exhibit is that by 1940, 80% of properties in Chicago and Los Angeles were carrying restrictive covenants that barred Black families from accessing them. That doesn't just go away. And so much of these tools that the federal government created contributed to the spatialized psychology of the maps and the ongoing processes that these different industries of real estate, financial institutions, and others created. Earlier this month, the National Association of Realtors released a report describing homeowners in America. Over the last year, 88% of home buyers were older white, wealthy individuals. Less than 15% were Black, Latine, or Asian homebuyers. That is more than 8 decades apart from the statistic I cited earlier about the restrictive covenants. So it really created this template that even though restrictive covenants are illegal, no longer binding, it created this propulsion point that continuously excludes Black people from homeownership and other areas of wealth building.
Even occupancy, just make this point simple, even occupancy, coming from Missouri, my parents moved out of dominantly Black North St. Louis as they got older and moved to a suburb. And there was a couple that actually made national news. There was a family, there was a woman, her boyfriend, her child, and his 2 children. And they were trying to enroll the child in school. And when the child found out about the home makeup, an unmarried couple, more than 2 children, not from that union, that child was denied entry into that school district. And so it was a result of restrictive covenant that had come down for decades, right? How do you racially exclude someone without mentioning race, right? So you have this covenant about what does the makeup of a home look like, or the inability to build sort of this multi-family dwelling, right? Even you talk about Jones Beach, right? If you read The Power Broker about Bob Moses, and you talk about how when you go to Jones Beach, there's that bridge, that overpass that's just too low for a bus because Black people are coming to the beach, usually in buses. And he's like, no, if you don't have a car, you can't get here. So just really interesting how through, I guess, de facto racism, right? We have come into a system where race plays a role in everything that impacts our lives, but just short of saying we're doing this intentionally or purposely race, right? I'm sorry.
I'm just going to add, because I think we don't want to broke the elephant in the room. We have to talk about the power of eugenics and scientific racism. Because when it's only starting to be unearthed now, right? So when we're building, there's a great book that I recommend all of you reading called The Liberal Reformer by Leonard Brown. And it's a powerful book that talks about the reformers, the liberal movement in this country. We're staunch eugenicists in this country. That people like Margaret Sanger and all, who purport liberalism, were those that reinforce the social construct of race. And redlining maps and the New Deal are not the advent of the segregation or the segregated footprint of our America. It started when we first both landed on this continent with First Nations in the And you have to think about the psychology that gives rise, not in the 1800s, but the early 20th century, as we are rising in power, creating a fourth arm of government in this nation. This concept of experts, these concepts of academia, of putting people in learning statistics, learning. How many of you in this room know about an individual named Homer Hoyt? Raise your hand. Homer Hoyt. Homer Hoyt, as a PhD student, under the auspices of the pedagogy that's rooted in eugenics, goes to the University of Chicago and begins to create planning tools. And one of the first books he writes is called 100 Years of Land Value. And in his dissertation as a college, as a doctorate student, writes 10 detrimental influences to land. Who do you think is on the 10? We are. Mexicans, and at the time, people who did not think, who were not Italians, Jews, these are not people that assimilated into whiteness at this moment. So here's the kicker. Someone like Homer Hoyt becomes the chief economist for the Federal Housing Administration under the New Deal. So do you think he's going to leave all of that at the door? No. Or is he going to bring that in to how we create the spatial footprint of America? This is why we can create as many policies as we want. Really, we can. But if we don't start getting into the ground of humanizing one another, you're just going to get get someone elected into office that will just trump what you've created.
No pun intended.
Policy.
No pun intended. Or pun intended.
Again, what scares above all these isms, and I will say this again, is our collective humanity. And if we don't center that as the impetus and the catalyst behind what we're trying to do, that exhibit is shown. I created that to show a demonstration that what, in this first era of this particular time period, has been rebranded by the time we get to today. Black codes become stop and frisk. It's all the same psychology. And the way is to oppose all of this thinking is really starting to reach even across lines, as hard as that may be, because it's so ingrained in our consciousness to look at a neighborhood because of its composition. We'll say it's less valuable. There's something psychological about it. So learn about eugenics, go visit the museum in Cold Harbor, Long Island, and learn that this was unleashed in every corner, not just real estate, not just housing. It was in our schools. What you're bringing up about an unmarried couple, they put this in our public education as a standard to reinforce a hierarchy of human value. And that's what we have to reconstruct. And that's what you have to do.
Thank you. I want to the book is called Liberal Reformer.
E-liberal.
The E-liberal.
And it's about race, eugenics, and economics in America.
I want to brief one to comment.
April brought up public right, and it's something that it's a different moment to be on campus with something when you reference that, because I think the thing that seems to be missing in so many housing conversations, especially like general public conversations, is we're to the point now where we're talking, not everybody, but a decent number of folks, and are talking about the racialization and intentionality in our criminal justice system, right? We're seeing this in documentaries, we're seeing it in movies, it's popular books, it's like you can pick up the book on it in the grocery store. Is it controversial? Are there people who are still trying to dismiss it and not acknowledge it and see disbelief around it? Absolutely. But what we aren't having is a parallel conversation around how the same systems and same design was put into not just real estate, not just bad actor real estate developers, right? This is not just like oh, this is the bad guy, right? You can say Trump, right? The Trump family is known as a long-time discriminatory, like New York City, outright racist, like New York developer, right? Well-known, well-documented. And it's not that they, in and of themselves, are somehow distinct from the system that was in place for real estate development in New York City at the time, which we continue to see and live with and experience today, right? There is no set of rules that say how a co-op or a condo can or can't discriminate against, deny, accept, approve an application of somebody who is applying to be a part of their co-op or condo association. Are they supposed to be adhering to fair housing? Yes. Who besides them in and of themselves are watching that? Right? So this is rampant, and it's not just in our real estate development, but deeply, deeply important, which is why with the public advocate, with Chimani, we were a part of the Racial Impact Study Coalition. It is in how we do land use and planning. It is so core to how we plan for our communities, and for a long time, our neighborhoods, Black neighborhoods and brown neighborhoods, didn't necessarily see this because they weren't really dealing with us. We were planning and governing largely our neighborhoods in and of ourselves, absent of government being involved. But now, what we constantly see is, well, you all don't know because you're not experts.
you don't have the expertise. That's not the right language. The process requires that you do X, Y, and Z. You can only intervene in this. These are your only options, right? There is not actually the space to create and shape our communities in the vision that we want to see, because planning does not really allow for that. Planning is designed to plan for, around, and rooted in largely, exclusively white European communities. That is what it is centered in, and we are going to continue to struggle, especially as we build more and more political power for communities of color to exercise what we want to do for our communities within the construct of the system that we have within. We're going to have a problem.
I'm hearing a lot about construct, and Mary, yes.
Because I know we're gonna wrap up.
We're gonna write soon. Give me 1 second, Mary. I wanna acknowledge Pastor Blue, who is here. Wanted to give you an opportunity, first of all, to be acknowledged. Thank you so much for coming. And introduce yourself. I'm sure I didn't do it the justice it deserves, and just give you a couple of minutes, and then Mary right there wants to follow up.
Thank you very much. I want to thank this tremendous panel today for enlightening us in so many different ways. One of the reasons why I came here today, invited by the senator, is because as we talk about the issues that we're grappling with here today, sometimes we have a tendency to leave it on the academic level. I'm an academic myself, so I get it. What we need, however, is grassroots organizations. And the Black church has to rise up and seize its power. I represent the New York Interfaith Commission for Housing and Democracy. We've been meeting for 12 years on these issues. When Lennox Towers was getting ready to go up, our organization went down there. We helped stop that because we said we will not do that in our neighborhood. We will not be safe. But we need everybody. We need boots on the ground. But the economic power of the African American church is tremendous. We run around with our hands stuck out begging people to drop crumbs from the master's table when we literally control billions of dollars. If we learn how to cooperatively bank together, we can change the system. Come on. And so I want to invite each and every one of you to think about getting involved with us as we move forward. You talk about Harlem? Don't you know, there was an organization that was started many, many years ago called Harlem Urban Development Corporation. It was part of the Urban Development Corporation of New York State. It was given power, eminent domain power, and power to construct things. Sutton was the chairperson of that. And the former director was sitting back here a few moments ago, Don Cosgrove. We are asking the governor now, reinstate that. It has never been done away with. All we need is the governor's signature, and we can control our community once again. Underneath the 125th, down 125th Street there, down by the pier, why don't we allow them to come on here to come in and encroach upon that territory, which should be for the economic development of our people? We designed that back in 1987 with a pier. It was designed. And now, we're going to give it to Columbia out of this. So I'm here thankful so very much for the opportunity to be here with you all today. You know, I'm preaching, so don't get me started.
I think, of course, historically, in America, the church, the Black church, has been so many things, right? One of which has been a source of information, a source that we can gather without being bothered with somebody, without somebody listening to what we're doing. And so I appreciate the fact that you brought that into the conversation, because we talk about rebuilding our community. That's part of the foundation. It has to be part of what we do going forward. So I appreciate that, because that's really a great historical reference. One of the other things, Miriam, there was, I don't know if we're doing that.
It's just a little plug. I just want to say, this was really satisfying, because when we started this project, I was in the library at Barnard, and the goal was to create a venue like this. And so it's just really moving to see all of you here, to see that we're engaging with each other, that we're having a conversation. We're talking about the accountability of this university. All of it is available to us when we, break down the walls of the gates, the gates that tell people they shouldn't come. We wanted to make sure that we were creating a resource that would invite you to come, and that would stimulate a public history discussion, because this history needs to be present for all of us. It is informing our decisions. It is already informing our decisions, and we don't know it, right? So when we are educating students here, the hope is that this is part of the foundation of what they understand as they walk around this community, as they share this community. But it's also important, I think, for us to make sure that this history is understood by young people before they get to college. You shouldn't have to get to college to hear this, right? To know this, because it limits what we're capable of doing and changing it. But it's exciting to see all of you here, and I'm just grateful. I just wanted to say thank you.
That's a good time for a temperature check. I know it's going to go, everybody's, we need the energy, right? This is good, right? You guys are here for information. As we sort of wrap up, we're not quite done yet. I wanted you to know there's so many questions and so many experiences, so many points of reference. I want to let you know that we will not have time for Q&A. We're out of time. This has been amazing. This will not be the last time that the Senator does a panel on the intersectionality of race and housing. It will not. This is only the first of many. And so we're going to allow, if you have questions, there should be some postcards that maybe our staff is distributing. Pass them out, and your staff will get back to you. I also want to acknowledge Miss Valerie Jo Bradley, who is here from Save Harlem Now. Thank you. Come on out. That's right. Come on down. Right. So pass it over to the kitchen. All right, go ahead and jump. So, I'm sorry.
Unfortunately, I have a reading that.
Oh, okay. I'm going to swap it in and swap it out. But thank you so much, Pastor Blue. Thank you. And thank you so much, Ms. Bradley, for joining us. So I know that you've been here for so much of the conversation. Would you like to say anything just briefly?
Well, I would just like to add that we need to also be looking at historic preservation and what that means for our community. Because it's through historic preservation that we're preserving our history. And as developers have found Harlem to be more and more attractive recently, buildings and institutions that have been a part of our lifeblood have disappeared. And when they disappear, our history disappears. And also, when some of these buildings where our neighbors, our families, our friends live, they disappear. And when they disappear, the political construct of our neighborhood changes. And that's how neighborhoods destabilize, how they change. And so we need to be looking at that. And I just like to ask you, as an architect, where do you think historic preservation fits into this whole discussion?
It's central for all the reasons you've stated. Again, you look at Tremont, which is where I'm from, and you go up and down Tremont Avenue from Webster all the way up to Southern Boulevard. All of those historic architectural representations of culture have all just were left under benign neglect and planned shrinkage, a policy under Senator Moynihan, FYI, that let everything just crumbled. It is incredibly imperative to preserve structures and buildings and have the representation not co-opted by some other cultural language or experience. And we don't have enough funding being allocated into historic preservation. So within my profession, we do advocacy necessary, but it's not just advocating. You need the funding, and you need the people that see the value, the cultural value of these structures.
But you also need the political will to save buildings. And buildings in New York City are saved if they're designated a landmark. And when you compare Harlem to other neighborhoods in New York City, the Greenwich Village is 75% protected by landmarking. The Upper West Side and the Upper East Side are 50% protected. New York is Harlem is less than 20%. And yet we have all these beautiful brownstones, majestic Gothic churches. But beyond just brick and mortar, these buildings also contain physically our history. For example, Save Harlem Now got one of the first one of the first landmarks designated in 2018. The first in a long time. And it was a small little area but rich in history, which was 130 to 132nd Street, 3 blocks between Lennox Malcolm X and Adam Clayton Powell. And on 130th Street, the building where the 1963 March on Washington resides. And it deserves to stay there. It's an apartment building now owned by the city, but maybe we can do something about that. But it is housing people, and I went to talk to some of these people, and when they were teenagers, they remembered when this building, all these important people were coming in and out of this building to plan the 1963 March on Washington. Also, there's another building on 130th Street, NAMA, the New Amsterdam Musical Association, which was the first musical union for African Americans in the country, because the city started requiring that you be part of a labor union, and the white labor unions or musical associations would not give blacks membership. So those musicians formed a musical association in 1906. They bought this building that's on 130th Street in 1920. So these are the kinds of things I could go on and on and on about what resided in those buildings and why it's important that you not only look at brick and mortar, but you also look at cultural significance. It doesn't have to be a fancy building, but it has important significance because of what happened in those buildings.
So let me real quickly.
And it disrupts the spatial narrative. You know, there's the building Lennox Lounge.
Yes, and it's gone.
And I got a picture that I was out like seeing the Lennox Lounge being destroyed. And then the billboard, I won't mention who was on the billboard, but it was a Gucci ad. I'm not gonna mention. And I'm looking at the Gucci ad as to what is happening to the cultural representation of Harlem while this building was being destroyed.
And the Lennox Lounge was the lounge where Billie Holiday, when she wasn't working, went to hang. And she had a corner that she used to sit at. It also was known for its art and jazz. And organ used to be in the window so that you could hear organ music. And, you know, like a little unknown thing is that Woody Allen, all of his bar scenes were filmed in the Lennox Lounge in his movies, which also didn't have another black person in it. But anyway, but he used the Lennox Lounge, and the Lennox Lounge is was the only surviving Art Deco, Art Nouveau bar in New York City, and it's gone.
So I just want to really quickly, I want to make sure, I thank Mary Rocco and Barnard. They hosted AHG's conference, so we brought a lot of these names to tour Undesign the Red Line and see it for themselves and to understand it. And I will say, this is where, like these, talking about, this is the first conversation. These things spark more, and that's the design. And I have had 2, and I think now we're at 3 of the banks reach out and say, I need to bring my whole team to see Undesign the Red Line. Can you put me in touch? Can you tell me where it's going to be? So this is like, that's what we're supposed to
So let me speak to that, because that's exactly what I wanted to accomplish here today. Why are we here today? We need to be educated. We need to understand, and we need to be able to intelligently inform others. I expect you to bring your church members, bring your classes, bring your tenant association, bring your youth organization, because the more of us that know about this, the more empowered we become. One of the things that we didn't talk about today is how information is disseminated in a racist way. We don't get the information, we don't learn our history, we're not taught our history, we don't get accurate accounts of what happens, we don't get accurate accounts of what's going on politically often. So we have to be really active and deliberate and purposeful about getting this information and taking it back to others. We have to make sure that our neighbors and our family members and everybody has this information. And that's the way we become empowered. So once again, I'm going to thank Barnard. I have been doing this exhibit kind of by chance. I came here to college students, first person in the family to go to college. I'm very concerned about that and interested in seeing our young women in Harlem benefit from this great institution. So after touring the program, Emma Wolf from Barnard said, let's go into this building. And I said, oh, what is that? And I think you were there, Mary, that day. And I was like, what? What is happening? So it was a twofer. And at that moment, I knew that I would be back here, bringing the community in. And I appreciate your honesty and even your showing the involvement of Columbia, showing the involvement of the institutions of this in this area. It's important. We can't dismantle this if we're not willing to sit down and speak the truth. So we do have to educate ourselves. We do have to talk about it. And if we're really, really interested in racial equity, we have to admit our part in the inequity. Okay? And then we have to come back and correct it. So I would like to think of today as the first step towards that correction. And in terms of what I'd like to see done, I want us to be mobilized. This won't be definitely a last. And there will be action and there will be policy. When I ran, I knew that I was going to take direction from stakeholders. Because that's who else am I going to listen to? We can't listen. Those people, their job is to do what they do. Their job is to make money. Our job is to make sure that people are housed, make sure that people can own, make sure that people can rent. And that is what we are supposed to do. So I appreciate your help in us doing that. And after today, I would like to talk more about certain things. I have bills in the legislature that I want people like, oh my God, that's crazy talk. But I saw the creation of Penn Station, not in my district. But in order to do that, they had to destroy rent-stabilized housing. Right? So why aren't we replacing that? It doesn't have to be there, but why, before we tear down and get rid of this stabilized housing, we don't create more housing stock?
It doesn't make sense for me to sit down as a legislator and say, okay, we're gonna create affordable housing, we're gonna create 100 units, we just destroyed 1,000.
That's right.
Then what are we doing? So this is something, there's so many aspects of this, there's so many nuances. I appreciate you, Marika, you're up there on us, lobbying, on the bus in Albany, far away, but I'm glad for it. Valerie Jo Bradley, it is very important the work that you do, our history and our culture, not just the housing, but the history and the culture has to be preserved. We don't want to see Harlem turned into a museum. We want to be there. We want to continue to live there. We tell our children to go do well, stay no to drugs, do your work, go to school, go to college, come back, and you can, not true. And they're doing that, and they're coming back to Harlem, they cannot live there. That's not fair. So it's more than just about housing. It is about legacy, and it's about continuing. And we have to recognize that. And folks, we've got to talk about race. I thank you. I want y'all to give it up for this dynamic. This is a hustle from ratchet politics. To close out, Barnard College, Mary Rocco, if I get it wrong, Miriam, April D. Simone. Did I mix it all up? I got it. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Rita Williams and Valerie Jo Bradley, all the panelists that were here today, the watchers out at home, all of you who stayed, those who came earlier. We want to thank you very much. Some closing remarks from all of you. Thank you.
I would just like to end by saying that earlier this month, New Yorkers unanimously voted for racial justice into the city charter. And if we're serious about that, one of the provisions is that we include safe, secure, affordable housing for all. And so that is the mandate, that is the aspiration, that is the vision, and we have the tools to do it. We need to put Black people at the center of that vision.
Thank you. Very simply said many times in different ways, reparations.
Yes.
Exactly. And we can't build on the same, we can't build anything new on the same foundations that we've been using. The sediment is dry and, falling apart, and we need to rebuild that foundation, new principles, new ideas, and inclusion of the people who are most impacted by whatever is being built. They should be leading that, whatever we create. I want to just I'm also just thankful that, again, everybody came, and I want to reiterate the thanks to Mary Rocco, because as a faculty member and the director of a center that is doing community engagement, she's really modeled how we can get that done, and I'm excited to continue working with her on that. And also to thank April for sharing her vision with us, and taking her experiences and making them something that can be transformative for others.
My thing would be picking up on what the pastor said, which is around organizing, and I think too often how to get involved and how to engage, and people power and getting active in your community. Other people have created the narrative that it's not something you should be doing. So let's remember good trouble. Agitation is a part of how we change and transform, and it is okay to be an agitator. In fact, it is what and how we have made all of our civil rights inroads, and so we should continue to agitate and organize.
Just grateful and convening a conversation. I think, again, we have to have elevator-style discussions within our own living rooms. We have to disseminate this information in a way that's accessible. And we have to really redefine allyship. and understand that allyship is going to be a core component in really how we look at each other and how in looking at each other as, again, fellow human beings that all are in need of something that's basic. Will get us a lot further so that we can scale these concepts again of democracy.
Thank you. And Ms. Bradley, in the final closing.
I would just like to say for now is interested in working with others to forward this narrative and to make certain that we save Harlem now. Yes.
Thank you. This has been amazing. I just want to, I know this is not the moderator's responsibility, but I want to do it anyway. Ms. Bradley was talking about historic preservation, and Pastor Dietrich Blue was talking about the Black church, and the senator talked about information. And one of the things that you know, it can also be racist, is how information is shared. And in the Black tradition, we have an oral history, right? And so Ms. Bradley has to go to the conference and talk to the people about their experience, right? So we receive information differently historically, and we share it differently historically. And so there's not just one way to share information, right? Everybody's not going to read it in a certain periodical, everybody's not going to be here at this conference, everybody's not. So my charge to everyone here is tell somebody, right? And then tell somebody else. Tell them what you heard here, tell them what you experienced here, tell them how it impacted you, tell them about what it is that you want to see next. Tell somebody. Right, because it's unfair to us, it's unfair to others to say, oh, you should have been there, you missed it. No, tell them what you heard. Tell them what you saw, because that's how we're going to start building community. And that's the basis of organizing, right? We have an oral history, use your mouth, tell somebody. Thank you so much. Appreciate Cleare. Appreciate all our sponsors, Columbia University, Barnard, Community Board, that were a part of the Senator's District 7, 9, 10, 11, and 12, Goddard Riverside Law Project, Palante Harlem, Kim Smith, who is here with his beautiful tall skirt from WKIM TV, Veronica Key, founder of the People's Film Festival, the Michelle Obama Democratic Club, the Northern Manhattan Improvement Corporation, West Harlem Environmental Action, WEAC, Harlem Congregations for Community Improvement, Community Service Society, the Association for Neighborhood and Housing Development, the New York State Senate, of course, New York State Black Legislative Task Force, New York State Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian Caucus. Thank you so much, anyone who's not mentioned, charge right here, and
I want to mention Destiny Glover, longtime organizer in housing. Recent candidate. And I also want to let everybody know we have, and C.J. James from our esteemed Senator Jill Graham's office. Thank you for representing. Appreciate you. And I want you all to know that you can watch this. What's the YouTube channel, please, somebody?
Cordell Cleare channel.
Cordell Cleare channel. You can watch this again and invite others to watch it. Come on, folks, we can do this. Yes. We have to organize, and mobilize. No one is going to do it for us. And we can do it. What would you say?
And support.
And support. That's right. And support. So everybody, we need your help. Thank you for coming out today. Thank you so much, Barnard.